Wow, this is really exciting. Looks like we've got over 400 people already joining in. For those who are unable to join in, if we hit our 500.
Wow, this is really exciting. Looks like we've got.
For those who are unable to get in, if we hit our 500 seat capacity, I just want to let folks know that we are also live streaming the workshop on YouTube. There will be a link for folks who are unable to join in via Zoom that will automatically direct folks in that direction. This exciting new opportunity for us to try to reach as many people as possible. I'm going to give it just a minute extra, and then we will get started because I see some more folks are coming in as we speak. All right, I think it's time that we can get started. I see we are about to hit our 500 person seat capacity, so we are absolutely in a full room. This is just a reminder for everyone listening, all the different ways people are participating. We've got over 500 people on the visual video workshop on Zoom with us right now. There's hundreds dialing in via telephone, and for the first time ever, we have an overflow room that is being broadcast live on YouTube. So we are doing our best here to make sure that anyone who wants this type of information can join in. This is a reminder, this is Cody Hunanian at Student Debt Crisis. I'm joined here with a team of advocates and experts that will introduce themselves shortly. Before we get started, I just want to let people know that we want to answer your questions. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please submit your questions there. We will take time throughout the presentation and at the end to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Natalia Abrams, the Executive Director at Student Debt Crisis, who can get us started with our presentation.
Great, thank you, Cody, and thank you to the folks we also have helping behind the scenes. Ian Kuhn at Savvy, our partners with this workshop. And if we can go to the next slide, we also have Sam Singh with Next Gen Policy here in California, and Aitana Ferez also with Savvy. Sam and Aitana, do we have you on the line?
Yep, Aitana here.
Hi, yeah, this is Sam Singh.
Great, thank you both for being here for this town hall to discuss student loan debt, and thank you to everyone that is joining us in all the ways that Cody just mentioned, by phone and online. You know, we have been hearing from a lot of you that there has been changes to student loans, legislative changes due to the CARES Act because of the COVID-19 crisis. And lots of different information, and we're here to help you clarify the information, let you know where we're at in the legislative process in terms of where your loan stands, and give you a tool, which is where Savvy comes in to help you enroll in income-driven repayment programs if your income has changed or you've lost your job, especially for so many of us that have been impacted due to this COVID-19 crisis. So we're really grateful to have you all on board. With that, we can go to the next slide. So we understand that, you know, you are all working very hard on this, and we can go to the next slide. And we know this because we did a survey recently, And I'm sure many of you that are on this call took part. Over 38,000 student debt crisis supporters shared their experience of what has been going on during the COVID-19 crisis. As probably no surprise to a lot of people, but many different types of Americans are uniquely impacted. We did see that older Americans are uniquely impacted, and frontline and healthcare workers are facing, extreme financial obstacles due to student loan debt. Moving on. From our survey, we saw that 36% of essential workers were not aware that there was any COVID relief for federal student loans. We saw this across the board in many different sectors. And I think it's important to know, while we speak of CARES relief today, right now we do have a looming deadline of September 30th being the last day of the CARES extension, or the CARES Act for student loan borrowers. And at this point, we are not hearing of an extension. And you'll hear that reiterated through this workshop today, because we want everyone to make sure they take care of their student loan debt before October 1st, so we don't get caught in the craziness that could easily ensue. So as you can see, people didn't even know there was relief, and by the time they may realize it, it could be gone. Moving on. We also know that this survey was taken earlier in April. So at that time, people were saying that definitely by the October 1st period, our frontline workers, many of us that have had hours change or are unemployed to the tune of 91%, are not going to be able to make payments in this 6-month period or around this October 1st deadline. Again, this survey was taken a few months ago. So this is why, I will say that the bill has not been voted on and signed and passed, and so there is still time, and we all need to be contacting our representatives and frankly screaming from the mountaintops that this cannot happen. And along with extending unemployment insurance and eviction protections, we need to also make sure to take care of struggling student loan borrowers, because we have 45 million people that have student loans here in America and are student loan borrowers. And we know that this is something, not just in older Americans, but again, I think if you're a student loan borrower, especially during this time and day and age of COVID, it's no surprise that this is causing extreme stress and anxiety due to the financial situation. And we know that this is a mixture, as we mentioned, of different issues such as paying rent or worrying about making money through your job or unemployment insurance, but also student debt uniquely is causing added stress to many student loan borrowers, including older Americans. This is just something we want to continue to point out, that not just people that are taking our surveys, but you are all speaking up. This is almost at 1.3 million supporters. So again, just a huge thank you. This is one of the reasons we want to do these workshops, to inform you about what's going on with student loans, to help you understand your available repayment options, as a way of saying thank you for all the support that you give us. So more than 1.2 million of our student debt crisis supporters have told Congress that they want to cancel student debt, especially now during the time of COVID. And we urge you, and you'll see in the coming slides, to contact your representatives, whether you call them or send them tweets on Twitter, or use excuse me, I'm going too fast. Use a pre-populated tool that will send an email to your member of Congress. It's very important, especially right now, before they head off to the summer recess, that we contact our representatives and let them know that not only do we need student loans to be canceled, we need these CARES Act immediately, the extension, so borrowers do not have to start repaying on October 1st. And in the chat box, you'll see that we have Cody sharing links, so you too can send a letter to Congress and take immediate action. Moving on. And for those on the phone that can't see the screen, we have the U.S. Capital Switchboard. This is an easy number at 202-224-3121. This will connect you with your representatives, and you can let them know how you feel about what's going on with the current CARES Act, how you feel about canceling student debt. We encourage you to share your student debt story. And again, for the folks that are on the phone, that number to the U.S. Capital Switchboard is 202-224-3121. And we know not all of you are on Twitter, but those of you that are, we've heard a lot that with COVID, members of Congress and senators are now at home a lot more and are viewing their Twitter more than they typically would. So this is a great way to reach out to your member of Congress, start a conversation. You'd be surprised, you will often get some sort of response. And here we've included, a simple tweet on, how to cancel student debt, but you can obviously make it your own. But we just encourage you to take action, whether it be via social media, sending a letter, signing a petition. And just by showing up today, you're taking action to understand what's going on with your student loans and hopefully to try to get your loans settled into at least a slightly better place if you're struggling right now or worried about what's going to happen on October 1st. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Cody, that's going to discuss what was included in the existing CARES Act that will, at this point, expire on September 30th. Cody?
Hey, thank you so much, Natalia. And obviously, thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Many of you have been a part of the movement to fight for the strongest relief possible for student loan borrowers. We are still working on that as advocates and experts, but for now, what student loan borrowers have available to them is the relief that was passed in the CARES Act. And Natalia's spot on. I have to really stress that this CARES Act relief has been implemented and had a 6-month timeline, meaning it was set to end on September 30th. Right now, despite there being negotiations in Congress for another stimulus, that is the expiration date that we are best comfortable sharing. CARES Act relief, first off, is available to only some federal student loans. Now, these are federal student loans that we would call, quote, federally held. Now, that includes direct loans, direct Stafford loans, direct Parent Plus loans, direct Graduate Plus loans, and direct consolidation loans. Now, this second level, what we call federally held federal family education loans, what you'll see as FFEL. This is where the CARES Act relief gets messy because there are some FFEL loans that are what we call federally held, meaning the federal government literally owns these loans, this debt. Those federal family education loans are eligible. Also, federally held Perkins loans. However, there are federal family education loans and Perkins loans that are called commercially held, meaning the debt is still held onto by a commercial bank. Those federal student loans do not qualify for this sort of relief. And also, I see a lot of questions coming through the pipeline about private student loans. The CARES Act relief did not include any benefits for private student loans. Those are the types of student loans that borrowers receive from a private bank. So, this excluded up to 9 million loans. So millions of people are not covered by CARES Act relief. And you would likely know if you were or were not because the relief was automatic and has been instituted for several months now. So if we go over to the next slide, I just want to reiterate what the CARES Act relief does for student loan borrowers. Well, great. Actually, this is a great visual. This is actually a screenshot from a borrower that we work with. And the reason we include this is because we want to show borrowers that many student loan borrowers have several types of student loans. So you can see that this person has a direct loan, They have a direct graduate plus loan. Those are the special loans for graduate students. And they even have a private student loan that's not eligible for this type of relief. So your portfolio of student loans may include some that are eligible and some that are not. And if we go to the next slide, then I'll jump into what the CARES Act does. So first and foremost, the relief that has garnered the most amount of attention is the fact that federally held student loans had their payments suspended until September 30th. They also had a waiver of interest. So no student loan borrower with a federal student loan, a federally held student loan, was required to make payments or had interest accrued starting March 13th, leading all the way up to September 30th. Now, the good news for those of us who work in public service or use other federal programs that have a timeline like loan rehabilitation, the 6 months that CARES Act relief was initiated does count towards these programs. So for example, if you could go back to the other slide, for example, public service loan forgiveness requires 120 monthly payments before you are eligible to apply for loan forgiveness. The time spent in the CARES Act, the last 6 months, will count towards that. And this last point, I see folks in the question box asking about this credit reporting issue. So the suspended payments enacted in the CARES Act relief are not supposed to be treated negatively on credit reports. And I wish I could tell you that that was the case. I actually am one of the borrowers that has had my student loan servicing company improperly communicate to the credit reporting bureaus that I am in what they would call forbearance, meaning I pause my payments for lack of being able to afford it. So there has been implementation issues that have led to credit reporting problems. If you're facing that issue, I would encourage you to email me at cody@studentdebtcrisis.org, and we can try to connect you with information that can help. Now we can head to that next slide. There's more that the CARES Act does. So if you're a borrower in student loan default, meaning you're falling behind on your student loans, the Department of Education halted involuntary collections. So until September 30th, the Department of Education cannot garnish your wages or withhold your tax and Social Security income benefits during that time. Now, this is another area where we've seen a lot of borrowers have their wages garnished, or their tax and Social Security withheld. You can actually request to have those payments returned back to you if it happened after March 13th when the CARES Act started. Many of us also have probably noticed that collections calls have stopped. If you're a student loan borrower who's in default, you're receiving calls from debt collectors. That stopped until September 30th. And also for those who are new students, if you attended a school and you needed a direct loan from the federal government to pay for it this period, you may be able to cancel that loan if you're unable to attend. And last but not least, I want to really flag for people that starting August 1st, the Education Department will begin to notify student loan borrowers about their repayment options when the CARES Act relief ends on September 30th. So please stay aware. You will be receiving communications about your options, and we want to make sure people know what is available to them. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Now, this is a reminder. This is so important for borrowers because as some in the media have defined it, there is a cliff that student loan borrowers are facing come September 30th. So without Congress passing an extension of CARES Act relief, student loan borrowers will have payments resume on October 1st. Their interest accrual will begin again on October 1st. Debt collection will resume immediately. And borrowers can immediately enroll in affordable repayment programs at that time. That includes income-driven repayment, default rehabilitation, which can help you get out of default and other federal programs that are typically available to student loan borrowers will be available when this expires. So do know that even though CARES Act relief is ending, you will have options that are available to you. And I think before we go on to the next section, there's a ton of questions coming in. So maybe we can pause for a moment and do Q&A for some of the great questions that I see coming in here. Now, I see a lot of borrowers are asking if there is relief for private student loans. And I really think that message is important. Natalia, do you want to give us a quick primer on the CARES Act relief and how it applies to private student loans?
So as Cody mentioned, unfortunately, the CARES Act relief only includes the majority of federal student loans. It did not include Perkins loans, and it did not include about half what was called the commercially held FFEL loans, federal family education loans. You should check with your lender and with your state. It does vary, but unfortunately, private student loans were not included in this current CARES Act.
I see a lot of people who've been impacted economically by the COVID crisis. Aitana, this is probably a great question for you because I know you're going to cover this momentarily. But I've got a question here from Vicky, and Vicky was asking what relief there is for her and her husband who lost their jobs in the middle of this crisis. After the CARES Act and moving into the future, what kind of options are there available to her?
Yeah, thank you, Cody. That's a great question. And actually, so we are going to touch on this a little bit later, but income-driven repayment plans are a great option should you be someone who potentially lost a significant amount of your hours that you've been able to work at your job due to COVID, or again, complete job loss and unemployment. What's great about income-driven repayment plans is they meet you where you're at with your student loans. And so should you have a significant decrease, what you're able to do is actually utilize a tool that we'll talk about a little bit later, completely put in your information as it pertains to your income and where you're at in terms of debt to income ratio at this exact point in time, namely if your income has significantly decreased. And what you're able to do from then on is enter into an income-driven repayment plan for the next 12 months that works best for you. It differs for each and every borrower. So when I do talk about it in greater depth as we continue on throughout the presentation, I will emphasize, how it's unique and how it presents different options for everyone, because everyone has a different situation with their student loans. But income-driven repayment plans are definitely going to offer you the most flexibility when it comes to unemployment or, loss of potential or partial loss of job. In addition to that, there are the options with deferment or forbearance. They're not a fix-all problem, or they're not a fix-all solution, though, to the problem. So IDRs are definitely something that borrowers should be empowered to look at and should feel confident to look at and explore their options there. And so I'll definitely walk through that more in depth later, but keep that word in mind, income-driven repayment plan, IDR.
Thank you for that. Yeah, these income-driven repayment plans, while they've existed for so many years, are all of a sudden becoming so important when we see millions of student loan borrowers being pushed back into repayment on October 1st. So I'm glad towards the end of this presentation, Aitana's going to dig into that a little deeper. There's some great questions on our live stream on YouTube, which is really great. This is the first time that we've streamed live on YouTube for people who couldn't join in because the room's full now. I've got a question here from Tiana. Natalia, this is probably another great question for you because I know we talk to borrowers with this situation all the time. But Tiana said that she has an FFEL loan that doesn't qualify for CARES Act relief. She wanted to know if there was any way to change the type of loan she has to make sure that she does qualify for federal relief.
Yes, absolutely. And Aitana, feel free to jump in here. Without seeing your loans, I would just say that you need to always understand that when you consolidate, you will restart the clock. So you could consolidate feasibly from an older FFEL loan into a direct loan. However, you want to see, you know, have you been on the repayment program already? How many years have you put into that repayment program? You know, it's not necessarily this easy decision. And that's where being able to see your best options through companies like Savvy that we work in partnership with is very helpful because, you know, we always say that at Student Debt Crisis, we are not financial advisors or accountants. We are borrowers just like you, trying to share the information we've learned over the last 10 years in this space.
Great. I'm going to do one more question.
Just a couple.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Jody. Just a couple off what Natalia said. You know, consolidation is definitely always an option to explore with your fellows. It's important to look at like the grand scheme of things, especially if you have more than one loan, because some loans might be further along than others, and the last thing you want to do is negate any progress you've made with X amount of loans, and then by just completely consolidating them all. And there are options to circumvent, consolidate one and maintain your repayment plans with the other, but definitely something to explore. And like Natalia said, our tool and our team is pretty well versed in that when it comes to figuring out your options there, if it's something that you think is going to be worthwhile for you to explore.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to take one more question here, and then we'll move forward. And then, of course, we will do more Q&A throughout the presentation. But I really want to cover this public service loan forgiveness question one more time. Tracy was asking, what if you already have 5 years earned towards your 10 years of public service to qualify for loan forgiveness? What happens in the last 6 months if you stopped making payments? Aitan, I know it looks like you're going to answer this live. So if you can just quickly address that. I know a lot of people listening are teachers, essential workers, healthcare professionals, whatnot.
Yeah, of course. So anyone who's currently on track to receive public service loan forgiveness has X amount of years. So for example, like Tracy has about 5 years working towards PSLF. You are in good shape. And non-payments are going towards your PSLF credits at the end of the day. What I encourage borrowers to do, if they are actually on track to receive PSLF and have done so for, like Tracy, 5 years or maybe even more or less, I encourage you, coming right out of this, assuming that September 30th is our hardline stop for this relief, I encourage you to get an employment certification form filled out. This is what you do, and at our organization, we work with borrowers to get it done for them by working with their HR team. But what I encourage you to do is go ahead and sign up or set up your ECF form, your employment certification form, so you're able to submit it to your servicer if you're on track to receive PSLF, being Fed loan. And this way you're able to figure out, okay, did those 6 payments between March and September count towards my PSLF forgiveness? And then if not, that's when you want to go ahead and see, like, okay, where's the discrepancy? Reach out to the servicer, because those payments should count. And if you do an employment certification form right after September 30th, that is kind of your check to be like, okay, I'm on track, this is good. And then if there's any discrepancy, that's when you want to get on the phone with your servicer and ask them, hey, where are these payments? Because they were $0 payments and I've made them, and now I'm resuming my payments, and I want to make sure that everything that was supposed to count counts.
Thank you, Aitana. And I think your audio cut out for just 1 second, so I just want to make sure folks got that. The time spent in the CARES Act, that's March 13th to September 30th, 6 months of payments, does count towards public service loan forgiveness. After September 30th, you can enroll in an income-driven repayment plan, which will also continue to count towards public service loan forgiveness. But I did see a couple of questions from folks who think they are going to have financial difficulties and are considering what is called a deferment or forbearance. And I just want folks to know that if they choose to do that after the CARES Act expires on September 30th, those programs do not count towards public service loan forgiveness. I know it's a lot. These are the kind of details we dig into when we do our hour-and-a-half long just traditional education workshops. There's just so much to cover with the CARES Act. We want to make sure people are staying tuned with relevant newsworthy items. So with that, I think let's move forward, and then we will do some more Q&A throughout the workshop. So if we can go to the next slide, this is a quick section. I want to make sure that people who are listening in today can make sense of what is happening in the rapidly changing student loan space. So lawmakers are currently negotiating another COVID-19 stimulus package. And we are working with many of the people on the call today and other advocates to make sure that student loan relief is part of that. So if we can go to the next slide there, you're probably hearing about these proposals to cancel student debt. About at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we started this campaign to cancel student debt that reached 1.2 million signatures, and lawmakers were listening. So we had people like Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who introduced bills that would have canceled $10,000 and up to $30,000 in student loan debt. Now, those have been proposed early on in the crisis, but were not passed. We then saw last month that the House passed their proposal for a second stimulus, which was called the HEROES Act. Now, this included up to $20,000 in student debt relief. And what's great about it is it included $10,000 for federal student loans and $10,000 for private student loans. So we were really excited to see that private student loan borrowers were included in that proposal. Now that too is standing as just a proposal. It passed the House, but it didn't quite make it to the Senate, and it's kind of stalled there. Again, the House has been very proactive on this topic. We saw this month alone another bill that included $10,000 in private student loan debt cancellation. And these are just a few. We've seen others that wanted to cancel student debt for healthcare professionals on the front lines. So the movement to cancel student debt is strong. It has allies in Congress, but none of these proposals have passed completely through and become law. Now, you're probably hearing what happened this week as well. Senate Republicans passed their HEALS Act, which is the Senate's proposal for a second stimulus package. Now, this was something that advocates, consumer and education advocates, were not very happy to hear because it did not include CARES Act extension. So when we talk about this cliff for student loan borrowers on September 30th, we have an opportunity to extend that. That was not included in the HEALS Act. And it does not include any permanent debt reduction proposal, such as debt cancellation. So this is quite a step backwards from what we were seeing in the House. Now, again, this too is just a proposal. This has not become law yet, but this is where the negotiating stands at this moment. Now, tangential to the HEALS Act was a bill proposed by Senator Lamar Alexander, who chairs the committee that works on education policy. His proposal has been labeled as, quote, no income, no payments, but that is not quite what it seems. This program actually looks a lot like what current repayment programs look like. So this bill proposal really just creates a new repayment plan, but it doesn't address the urgent crisis that's happening right now because of COVID-19. And there are a myriad of loopholes that I'm not going to get into yet, but these loopholes in this Alexander proposal could actually prevent borrowers from accessing the student loan forgiveness that they expected. So between these two proposals that came out this week, we see a failure to respond appropriately to the crisis. And also we see that at least on one side of the aisle, there's a reluctancy to extend the relief that's already offered to student loan borrowers. We are continuing to fight with allies, again, many of them on this call today, to try to correct this and to make sure that at least the CARES Act's extended, if not stronger provisions. But we want to clarify what's happening in the environment right now. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide. Great. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Samantha Sang at Next Gen Policy. She's going to cover some additional resources because there's so much out there for people who are impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Sam, do we have you on?
Yes, hi Cody, and thanks everyone. This is Sam Sang from Next Gen, like you just said, and really quickly, we're a nonprofit political advocacy dedicated to working on policy across a broad spectrum of progressive issues, including confronting student debt. So thanks for having us here today. So yeah, this next section, just wanted to let everyone know that besides student debt relief from the CARES Act, there are additional resources out there to help us all out during these times with other financial stressors. We are sad to say, to keep emphasizing this point, but many of these relief efforts may have expired or will soon expire, but we'll run through them just so that folks are, hopefully you got to access them. So yeah, in this slide, so several states have made deals with private student loan lenders, and specifically that happened in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Virginia, and Washington. So that happened in April, and some of that relief was in the form of forbearance relief for at least 90 days, stopping debt collection lawsuits for at least 90 days, waiving late payment fees, stopping negative reporting, and working to enroll borrowers in other assistance programs. For those of you in Texas, there was a something that went through the state courts, an order that limited wage garnishment on defaulted debts until after May 7th, 2020. In Washington, D.C., had an issue order prohibiting debt collection activity until at least June 12th, 2020. And then finally, for those in Kentucky and North Carolina, they stopped collections on state-held debt. So there's little transparency around these deals though. And so they may have expired. We just urge you to directly call or make contact with your private student loan servicer to make sure what the status is of any relief options that may still be available. Oops. And then as the next slide gets pulled up, hopefully, no. I'm still seeing a blank on the slides, but I'll just say to get started, we know there are other more specific reliefs, and we're happy to spread the word here in regards to some servicers and schools. So specifically for those with Navient, Navient is a 90-day disaster forbearance with no waiver on interest though. And other companies are offering disaster forbearance as well, like Advantage, Ascent, Brazos, iHelp, College Avenue, Common Bond, Earnest, and MEFA. Again, the point here is also to call your servicer directly to see what private loan hardship modifications they may be offering. And some school-specific reliefs that we found out in the last few months. The University of California has announced relief for student loans left out of the CARES Act. So those are the Perkins loans, California Dream loans, and others. And at least the last word we heard, payments and interest will be suspended until September 30th. There is also news that the $6 billion of emergency relief for students will be given to University Nation from the Department of Education. And as we move on to the next slide, and as that comes up, there were other relief options that were passed in the CARES Act, and we recognize that student loan debt may not be the only thing that you're worried about. So just want to quickly mention here what other financial relief options are out there. So there were temporary relief for homeowners and tenants in the form of moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. There's been income assistance for individuals. So that looked like checks that went out to eligible taxpayers who filed in 2018 or 2019, and the amount that folks should have received depended on income and if you're married or have children. We know that there's word about some of that being looked at again. There's expanded unemployment insurance. So this is an expansion of unemployment benefits on top of what your state may offer already, including at least 13 weeks on top of your state benefits. And the eligibility was expanded to independent contractors, self-employed workers, and gig workers. And there's still ongoing support for small businesses and nonprofits that focused on really, on the small businesses side. And that looks like other paycheck protection programs and funds for payroll costs and other costs of business. Again, unfortunately, we do want to make sure to flag that some of these reliefs may have or will soon expire without further congressional action. So just touching on these financial relief benefits, we're not the expert on these items, but just wanted to flag them in case you're also looking for other help in other ways. We recommend calling your Congress representatives and or your state representatives as a first good step to get pointed in the right direction on how to apply or get further information about these benefits. And then finally, thanks again for having me here. Just want to wrap up by letting you know, NextGen, we've compiled a broad list of COVID-19 relief information that covers everything from criminal justice related resources, resources for veterans, at-home learning resources, student debt resources, and especially mental health, as all these things do toll on everyone. So we're at nextgenpolicy.org. And I'll just sign off by saying thanks again, and hopefully, these resources will help you out. We know they get this takes a heavy toll on folks, and so hope everyone stays safe and well out there. I think we're going to move on next to getting into some more details on a tool that can help folks more through this confusing time. And thanks again to our partners at Savvy and Student Debt Crisis for putting this together.
Great, thank you, Sam. I think Aitana is going to jump in here and talk about the work that she does at the online social impact startup Savvy. Aitana, are you on the line with us still?
Yes.
Great.
So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll get started and talk a little bit about Savvy and what we have available to borrowers struggling at this point in time. So first, I just want to give you a little bit of background on the kind of loan grand scheme of things. So specifically, I want to speak to federally income-driven repayment plans and how your loans are set up to be eligible for this. So income-driven repayment plans, as you can see on the screen, make monthly payments more affordable for borrowers because they're based on different circumstantial causes. So family size, number of dependents, number of people living in a household, your income, your marital status in terms of whether or not both you and your spouse potentially have student loans, or if you're a single borrower and simply just your debt to income ratio is quite significant and not something that you can afford the standard payment on. So everything is really kind of taken into consideration, and it's the way we think of it at Savvy. It's meeting borrowers, ideally and hopefully where they need to be met when it comes to their student loans. So when it comes to situations that have gone on, especially in wake of COVID and everything that's going on, people are, as we've seen throughout the chat and the Q&A, losing their jobs. There's been an income disruption, and it could result in a significant decrease in income as the year continues to go on and even into 2021. And what we really want to express upon borrowers is the fact of the matter that you can lower your payments to as little as $0 per month, just simply based on situations like this, or potentially you're a recent grad. This was kind of my situation last year. Recent grad, just started a new job, but definitely was not making enough to, start my payments on my student loans. And so thankfully, based on my little waitressing jobs pre my actual job with Savvy, I was able to qualify for a payment, a $0 payment for the next 12 months. And it's carried me through and made it so now when I do start paying on my student loans, come after September 30th, with an income-driven repayment plan, it's something that is flexible and does not leave me wondering, how am I going to be able to afford my rent or groceries at the end of the month? So definitely something to consider. it's always available to federal student loan borrowers, specifically those borrowers with direct loans. There is the option to enter an income-based repayment, specifically the IDR plan under the income-driven repayment plan for federal family education loans. However, those loans, if you're a public service employee, do not qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program. So just like a couple of things to run through, borrowers considering consolidating those loans, whether or not that's the right move. That's definitely something that, us at Savvy, Cody, we're all happy to help support and help borrowers figure out their best option, because we know at the end of the day, there's just not enough information and advocacy and knowledge given to borrowers. And we want to give that power back to you and feel like you can take control of your student loans, because that's really the goal, whether it's looking towards forgiveness or looking towards, saving as much as you can month to month. So this is not significantly a burden, but until there's a greater solution, you're able to manage it for the time being. Federal loans that do not qualify for the CARES Act relief are eligible for other repayment plans, and that's what I was talking about. So the FFEL loans do qualify for an IDR plan. It is income-based, however, it is not one that's going to set you up towards forgiveness. It's not going to set you up on track to see that those loans chipped away after 10 years and being completely forgiven. So that's kind of where the discrepancy is, just with that kind of loan, the federal family education loan that is, kind of outdated at this point in time, but still very significant, still out there. We work with tons of borrowers who still have that type of loan. And we can go to the next slide. So just a little bit about federal income-driven repayment plans. These are kind of the options that you'll see when it comes to them. You'll hear these different names come up. So you'll hear about revised pay-as-you-earn, pay-as-you-earn. There's the new income-based repayment plan, income-based repayment plan, income-contingent repayment plan. All of them fall under the umbrella of income-driven repayment. And, it's important to note, something that borrowers come to us all the time about is the two kind of terms that are oftentimes conflated are income-driven and income-based. It's important to consider that income-based is a version of an income-driven repayment plan. And then income-driven is the entire, program of this option, where a borrower is not set up to pay off their loans in a certain period of time, being 10 to 20 years. But rather you're set up to pay off your loans at a rate that is driven based on your income debt to income ratio. So these are just some example percentages of what you would see if you were to enter one of these programs. For the most part, income driven repayment plans, like you can see on this page, about 10 to 20% of your income. And then beyond that is where it takes into consideration your family size, the number of dependents. If your spouse has loans, that would be, each repayment plan works differently for different borrowers. What's great about the tool that we've developed is it kind of does the thinking for you on this end. But I know as a borrower myself, I like to know a little bit more about these loans. And so if there's a question that you have about them, I encourage you to reach out, seek out sources that are going to provide you with this information, being SDC, being us at Savvy. We have a significant amount of knowledge and documents based on this information in our Knowledge Center that we're happy to share with borrowers that may just, feel like they want to know more about what they're about to pursue with their student loans. All of these loan repayment plans that you see here, like I said, income-driven repayment plans that if you have direct loans will also set you up to pursue the public service loan forgiveness should you be a public service employee. So key to note, because that's where borrowers see their forgiveness. If they are public service employees, nonprofit employees, they're on an income-driven repayment plan, they're paying up something that works for them, and then should they be 5, 8, 9 years down the line, they're going to see that forgiveness once they reach that 10th year and are on top of employee certifying each year to ensure that they've earned the credits that they deserve. And we can go to the next slide. So these are just some examples of what an income-driven repayment plan would look like based on your income, so debt to income ratio. Obviously, as you can see, much more flexible and completely different from what you could expect with, and I'm going to use this particular example, a $52,000 loan at about a 6.8% interest rate on a standard plan would anticipate, a borrower could anticipate a payment of about $600 a month. I know as a recent grad, that would have been extremely difficult to cover. And so again, this is where we like to say these repayment plans are meeting you where you're at for the time being, and namely driven for those borrowers that would like to pursue forgiveness because, you know, they are public service or nonprofit employees that have earned the ability to apply for that program. So with that, I want to just touch on our student loan aid tool. Is our student loan navigator that we're so happy to bring to all of you in coordination with the student debt crisis. What's great is we actually have it, you know, you're able to access it via your phone or your computer. So if you want to open up a separate tab right now, or if you want to go ahead and log in on your phone, if you're watching this on your laptop, I encourage you to do so. But what you can do is go ahead and input answers to these questions, whether or not you've been impacted by COVID-19, or your income's been impacted, and get started with our tool. What's great is that it's going to figure out what income-driven repayment plans will help reduce or completely bring down your payments to a $0 payment for the time being after September 30th. So we've worked with a handful of borrowers, myself included, that have been wondering, you know, I'm applying for this IDR repayment now, so I'm getting into a new repay plan or I'm getting into a new pay plan, but will I expect a payment before September 30th because I'm applying for this now? And the answer is no. So you're going to apply for your income-driven repayment plan at your earliest convenience if it's something that you know you need to do in order to set yourself up for the next 12 months after the September 30th date. And what you can expect is that your servicer will let you know what date after September 30th you can expect to continue repaying on your student loans. So for example, I had a borrower set themselves up on a new income-driven repayment plan back on June 24th. And her payment is not going to be again until October 24th. So she is going to anticipate a payment, you know, almost a month after the CARES Act relief ends. So like I said, I encourage you all to, you know, seek an income-driven repayment plan if that's something that is going to support you at this point in time as soon as possible, so you are good to go once CARES Act relief, you know, ends. Hopefully not, but, you know, assuming it is going to come to a stop on September 30th, we want to make sure that all borrowers are set up to know what their next steps are moving forward. And the benefits of our tool, they kind of speak for themselves once you get to it, but you're able to actually sync your loans directly with our platform. So you don't necessarily have to know the nitty-gritty details because we're able to completely transfer that information using a secure Plaid Sync integration. So it's a similar integration that everyone who uses Venmo is able to access as well. And then you're able to see personalized repayment and forgiveness options because at the end of the day, I'll speak to you as a student loan borrower myself. I'm sure my team members would be able to speak to you, Natalia, anyone else. Student loans are not a one-size-fits-all situation. So when it comes to them, your repayment plan and your forgiveness options are unique and catered to you. And that's what we want to present you with, is how these options are going to help you figure out your next steps and ultimately work towards financial wellness and any financial goals that you might have. It's automated enrollment, so your IDR gets sent directly to your servicer. If you have multiple loans, you sync those multiple servicers, you can guarantee that all of those documents are going to be sent to the multiple servicers that you input into our tool. So at the end of the day, which I've said probably about 5 times now, but you know, we just want to give the power back to you all, being the user, being the borrower, being the person that is significantly affected at this point in time. And with that, I don't think we have any more slides that pertain to the tool, but I can absolutely take any questions that Cody or Natalia think are important to address at this point in time.
Great. Thank you so much, Atana, and to Sam and Cody. We are definitely going to take your questions. For those folks on the phone that don't have a computer screen in front of you, the tool that was just being talked about is crisishelp.bysavi, BYSAVI.com. I'll say that again for folks on the phone. It's Crisis Help by Savvy, and Savvy is spelled SAVI.com. And we want to, especially thank Savvy for building this tool right away in light of the COVID crisis and providing this, completely free of charge. It will not take you to any paid service. And, we have been strongly encouraging all of the borrowers and supporters that have been writing us to, do this as soon as possible. If, again, you've lost your job or your hours have been reduced or anything has changed majorly to your income, so you don't have to worry about, what goes on in the next few months and can at least know what your payments will be for the next year. And with, all these programs, you need to apply each and every year. But, this is a great way to have some peace of mind, hopefully on your federal student loans. And we will keep fighting and are definitely hearing your concerns and your voice on working on private student loans more, because that something needs to be done there as well. And lastly, we just want to thank Netroots Nation folks that joined this call. Netroots Nation is a conference that Student Debt Crisis has joined many times. It's a nation-leading progressive conference. There's a link for those, that have the benefit or luxury of free time during COVID. If you have time, we encourage you to check out the conference. However, in no way is that a requisite for being on the call or getting any of the information. And with that, I will send it to Cody so we can take your questions.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And again, on behalf of Student Debt Crisis, thank you to everyone who joined on today. Aitana, it's great to have you from Team Savvy. Ian, thank you for helping on the back end as well. And of course, Sam Sang from NextGen, who's been a great ally on this. So a ton of great questions. We're going to try to address as many of them as possible. I think I'm going to start off here. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to take a payment here from Anna. Anna says that her student loans were part of CARES Act relief, so her payments automatically stopped being deducted. She was enrolled in auto pay. Is that going to automatically begin in October, or does she need to do something proactive to start her auto pay again?
Do you want me to go ahead and answer this, Cody?
Yeah, Aitana, go ahead if that's something that your team's been working on.
Great. Sorry, can you reiterate it one more time? Just so I can hear it
Borrowers
again.
are in auto pay for their student loan bills. Obviously, many of them have turned that off because the suspension. Will a borrower expect their student loan payments to just pick up again in October, or do they need to reset up auto pay and other account functions?
Yep. So at this point in time, as far as my own student loans go with my federal servicer, you can expect them to pick up if you are not leaving your 12-month period, if you're in an income-driven repayment plan or whatever repayment plan you're set up with. If you have that auto pay set up, then after September 30th, the next date that you can expect to pay on your student loans, and your servicer will send you either an in-mail in your servicer's inbox or directly to your email, or potentially even by mail, depending on how you receive communication. They'll let you know exactly what the situation is there and whether or not you'll need to reset up your auto pay. But for those that are already set up, there should not be any change unless for some reason your auto pay account is no longer an account that you're utilizing or has since expired. But yep, it should completely resume, and you should receive, you will expect to receive, you should expect to receive communication from your servicer with regards to when that next payment is come the date after September 30th.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that you should expect to see that. We are already hearing from some borrowers who are receiving communications from their loan companies that look maybe like spam, or maybe they're not necessarily trustworthy communications. So, be aware, as we mentioned, August 1st, your student loan companies and the Department of Ed are going to be reaching out. Try to stay attuned so that you don't miss that message, because obviously it's going to be really important that you know your options when we get there.
Definitely.
All right.
And like Cody said, I would lean towards waiting to hear from like within your servicer's website or actually from the Department of Ed. The last thing you want to do is assume that someone is reaching out on behalf of your servicer, because that's just not a case ever.
Yep, we expect a lot of predatory companies to try to take advantage of the confusion. So, as Aitana said, look out for those communications. When in doubt, contact your loan servicer or the Department of Education directly to make sure you truly understand the situation that you're in. This is a great one from Joyce. We didn't quite get into the details here, and Natalia, I think you'll be able to cover this. But Joyce says that she was continuing to just manually make payments during this COVID crisis. So her student loans payments were suspended like many federal student loans, but she chose to make payments anyways because she could afford to do so. But she noticed that it's all going towards interest and none of it's going towards her principal balance. Can you help clarify why that may be the case?
So and actually, Cody, I think you can help me out with this the most. It's probably that, it go to any unpaid interest first, and then you could start paying towards principal. I mean, unfortunately, this is the reason why we often don't suggest making 2 payments in a month. That often it does, and you're, I guess, only chipping away at that interest, but I think you can explain it better.
Yeah. So, when the CARES Act initially started, it was sold that borrowers who chose to continue to make payments would be paying down their principal balance. But what was not clarified initially was that some borrowers have interest that's been accrued and they haven't paid it down yet. And it's piling up in their account. And I have that. Like I have unpaid interest in my account. So for any borrower who chooses to make a manual payment during the CARES Act relief, their interest has to be paid off first. So until that happens, you're going to see all of your payments go to interest, and then it'll go all to principal balance. All right, here's a question from an anonymous attendee. Probably something I can address because I know I've been talking to advocates about this quite a bit. But this person had their wages garnished throughout the pandemic, despite the fact that CARES Act says that federal student loan borrowers will not face wage garnishment. I can go ahead and clarify what's going on here because it's something we've worked on at Student Debt Crisis. You are correct. The CARES Act very explicitly says that wage garnishments should stop starting March 13th and at least until September 30th. Unfortunately, this requires that the Department of Education literally send letters directly to employers instructing them to stop the wage garnishment. And it wasn't until about a couple of weeks after CARES Act began that allies of ours identified that the Department of Education hadn't even sent those letters to employers. So without that instruction, employers did not know to stop wage garnishments. Unfortunately, the fix that we have identified for many borrowers is that they need to speak with their HR departments directly and try to communicate that this is the law, and to try to work within their own company to address this. So it's something many parts of the CARES Act have not been implemented properly, and it's something we're hearing about, but the fix isn't necessarily as simple as others. So contact your HR department. If that doesn't work, contact the Department of Education and share whatever information you gain from them with your company, and do your best to try to fight to end that. This is another one, Natalia. I know you can definitely answer this because this is something that you are working on as the executive director of Student Debt Crisis. But Amanda was not quite clear, didn't quite clearly understand when we talked about CARES Act extension. She asks, is there just no possibility of an extension of the CARES Act relief?
So that's a great question, Amanda. And the truth is, there is still a chance. There has been no vote yet. We have, the final details have not been stated or signed. Unfortunately, from what we've been seeing this week, and frankly over the past few weeks, is in the bills that have been that we have seen, they are not including any provisions. So for a while, advocates have been fighting to extend the CARES Act for more than a year. Then we started to hear more like January, and now we are hearing that payments will resume on October 1st. But not in, at this point, Congress has not gone to recess, and that's why we strongly encourage, you to send a letter to your representative, to call your representative, and speak very loudly about how you feel with them not planning to not extend the CARES Act.
Great. And, of course, we're going to continue to fight really hard to create the strongest protections we can for student loan borrowers. So, we have not given up as advocates on this issue. Aitana, this is probably a great question for you. A borrower on the line asks, what do you think about third-party companies who monitor people's public service loan forgiveness and income-driven repayment plans? I think this is an important question because the work you all do at Savvy is so important, but there's others in the industry who muddy the water. So if you could help clarify, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So speaking specifically like on behalf of Savvy and similar organizations that occupy a space like ours, what I would say is trust your employer, trust your membership groups, trust the networks that you go to for, you go to Student Debt Crisis, you trust them to give you advice, to give you knowledge, to give you empowerment on certain situations when it comes to finances like student debt. Savvy is, in a way, a third party, admittedly, and federal student loan programs, like everything that you should be able to have access to, that should be straightforward, it's all presented to you on the federal student aid website. What I will tell you, though, is that through that, there is just so much disconnect, borrower to servicer, servicer to, actual Department of Education policy, getting back to your members of Congress. And so that's where we kind of come in, other organizations that exist in our same space, that's where we come in to bridge that gap. What we do is we don't charge a monthly fee for the partners that actually utilize the Savvy platform. We charge a one-time fee, either. It's actually,
if I can just jump in for all Student Debt Crisis members, this has always been free of charge. And is one of the main reasons that we work with you. So, and I will completely agree that all third parties are not the same. In fact, Savvy is the only company that we work with in this space. These are trusted people that have been organizing in the student loan space for years before they started Savvy as a company, and Student Debt Crisis feels very strongly that they are to be trusted. And through this crisis tool and other projects that we've done, it's always been free of charge to Student Debt Crisis supporters. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that our supporters knew that this is something we very strongly stand behind.
Yes, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And like Natalia said, for SDC, like Savvy has always been free of charge, and we're happy to support you all because we understand your fight to figure out your best option. So, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be paying anyone else necessarily to figure out your student loans because they're yours. You're already subject to a monthly payment on your student loans. The best thing you can do for yourself is set yourself up for success and figure out what options are available to you. And with SDC and the tool that we've built out, at this point in time, you're able to do that to figure out your next steps, whether that's an IDR, PSLF options, or simply contacting someone to figure out whether or not student loan debt will hopefully one day work towards being canceled, and or at least, you know, a greater comprehensive solution for everyone out there.
Yeah, and also to add, you also make it clear, and this is clear, like you said at the beginning, on your website as well, that this is always something you can do yourself, you know, so you can go and use the Savvy tool, see how much you can save, and if you want to do your own paperwork and don't feel comfortable sharing that information, you know, we understand that. So I like that, you know, that's a great way to identify with these companies. Are they, you know, if somebody is trying to charge you hundreds of dollars to do what is a free service through the Department of Education, that is when you need to question it. There are plenty of financial aid services and accountants or tax preparers that may charge a small fee. That's quite a different story than the number of borrowers we've spoke to over the years that have paid $600 or more for services. So just be very wary of that, and always know that you can do it yourself if needed. But what we see is such a breakdown between the borrowers, student loan borrowers, and our student loan servicers, right? With Navient, with Great Lakes, that so much of the time our applications get lost or delayed. And what we've seen is it's really great to have someone be able to step in and intervene on your behalf.
Great. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions here. I've got a question here from Colleen. Natalia, I think this is probably a great one for you as well. Colleen says that she was told by her loan servicer that some of her federal student loans qualified for the CARES Act relief, and other federal student loans that she has do not qualify for CARES Act relief. Can you help clarify what's going on there?
So unfortunately, there were about 9 million, 6 to 9 million loans that were federal loans that were left out of the CARES Act. These were Perkins loans that had not been consolidated into other loans. Those are loans you received from your school, except for California, as Sam mentioned earlier in the call. And then also commercially held older FSEL loans, or federal family education loans. Those were loans mostly only given prior to 2010. So it's a lot of us had a mixture of different loans, and that is, my guess, is what's happening in your situation.
Great. Another question here. I think this is a question that I can help answer. Jim wanted to know if his private student loans can somehow be transferred into one of these federal student loans. And Jim, unfortunately, private student loans from banks are not the type of student loan that you can consolidate or refinance or anything else into a federal student loan. For years, we've advocated that people should try to exhaust their federal student loans options before they take out private student loans, because of that fact that borrowers with private loans are excluded from the federal loan options. Now, I do want to clarify for other people on the line, if you do have a federal student loan and it does not qualify for the type of repayment programs or loan forgiveness programs you're interested in, you do have the ability to do what's called a consolidation that changes the type of federal student loan you have. That is something that comes with a great deal of consequences. So I would encourage folks to go to the Department of Education website at studentaid.gov. And you can find out more information there. That's something that we cover in our longer form workshops that don't necessarily cover CARES Act relief. So I want to make sure people really understand their options there. All right, I think we've got time for one more question. This is a question from Jeff. And Jeff was paying attention to our portion earlier about the landscape, the student loan policy landscape. And he asked, is there really any serious consideration for a debt cancellation proposal at this point of the game?
It's a tough way to answer. So I think we need to keep fighting for it. I will say, as someone that's worked in this space for going on 10 years now, that this is the most energy I've seen from our lawmakers on canceling student debt, on including it. We're seeing it including now in party platforms. However, also don't want us to lose sight that we need to extend the CARES Act as well. So I think that it may not happen tomorrow or in this next round of bills, that we are, getting closer, and we took kind of a giant leap this year that surprised even those of us like myself that have been in the space for a long time. So I don't think it's a time to give up hope, but I do think we also want to be realistic that extending the CARES Act provisions is first and foremost for so many people, and then let's work on getting it even more than $10,000 in forgiveness that will help so many more people, and making sure that we continue to work on private loans and Parent Plus loans and all the other types of student loans that are out there as well.
Great. Well, with that, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. Just a reminder, if you are interested in any of the programs we talked about for affordable repayment, please visit the crisishelp.buysavvy.com website. And you can also email us at info@studentdebtcrisis.org if you have any questions. We always do our best to try to point people in the right direction. So with that, thank you everyone, and have a great afternoon.